So hello everyone, my name is Joy McHill. I am the Senior Program Officer with Refugee Welcome Collective. I want to first welcome you to our Refugee Welcome Collective monthly webinars. In these sessions, we aim to bring you interesting and timely information just like this one. Our monthly webinars are social learning spaces and are meant to be an opportunity for you as staff at the local and the national levels to share resources, best practices, challenges, lessons learned in the field. So we hope that you enjoyed today's webinar, Countering Rhetoric, the Election and Security. Just a little bit about us. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, monthly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, resettlement agency staff, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Just for housekeeping, as a reminder for everyone joining us today, everyone is going to be automatically muted. However, if you have any questions or any technical issues, feel free to drop it in the chat so we can assist you. Also, feel free to come off mute to ask your questions during the webinar. We'll also have time for Q&A toward the end of the webinar. So please feel free to drop any questions or come off mute during this time as well. And our presenters are going to be more than happy to assist. Additionally, any resources and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to everyone. And this brings us to our presenters for today. We have Christopher Plummer, who is the Director of Media with Church World Service, and Don Hanks, who is the Director of Security with Church World Service. And I also have Medicine O'Day. I want Medicine to introduce yourself.
No worries. I'm the media associate on the press team at Church World Service with Christopher Plummer.
And Madison, before joining our team on media engagement and all of what we do, also worked in Texas as a case officer. So Madison is very knowledgeable about any type of issues around government policy, about dealing with anti-immigrant hate, and with helping out clients through our network.
All right, Chris, you can all take it from here. I also have my colleague, Jessica Ashcraft, joining us. So please take it, Chris, from here. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can go to the next slide then. Is this the first slide? This is different. There we go. Well, back. Okay. Well, so I just want to say that the political state of play right now obviously is very antagonistic towards those that we serve and those that serve the people we serve. As we've seen in Ohio with Haiti, Haitian immigrants, and other folk, there are certain people that are trying to attack those asylum seekers and refugees and the programs overall. And I don't think it can be overstated at this point. I think this is going to be the biggest thing that we have to address in the final weeks before the election. And Congress is obviously very narrowly split. And I think often the people we serve are used as political pawns. This is obviously not something that we try to do. When we tell stories, when we try to push things out to press, we just want people to share their stories and not use them. We want them to be heard more than anything else. And early polling, it's not very predictive. We see new polls from Kitapac and others that seem to go this way or that way, and we don't want to take anything for granted. But it also doesn't really tell us what the configuration of the House and Senate are going to be moving forward, which we all focus on the president and who's going to be the president a lot, but a lot of the people that are in Congress actually decide much of what will impact our clients. So in that time, while we can't just trust the polling, we're going to keep on pushing our stories, our facts, the facts, excuse me, and everything we can do about that. And honestly, our message continues to resonate for many, and we do have champions in Congress, even though it's more divided than ever. But I think that we are not alone in the work we do. I think we just need to provide the stories and the positive reinforcement of the programs that impact our work more than anything. We can go to the next slide. So here are just like some examples of the press hits that we've had in recent times. And the power of this is that often number of these are national publications, which is great because we want to keep the national conversation around this. But at the same time, we have discovered more and more and more that there's been greater distrust in national media, but people still trust local media, their local TV stations, local radio stations, their local newspapers. And so we try to get these stories there as well, just because the people think, and I'm just one of them, that when we see something that is impacting us locally in a positive way, we respond to it quickly. So these are just some like ideas and some success that we've had. We have Harrisonburg, excuse me, and a few other localities that really just like grabbed onto the work we're doing. We can do the next slide. So a lot of what we talk about when we do media trainings in general, but it's especially prescient when we are talking about the weeks ahead of this election, is that really need to know your message. Like, and a good way to identify that is to like, what's the mission of your organization? And how does that mission inform the work you do in specifics? So there's two examples here, and I'll just read them real quick because I think they're very evident. And yes, Don, that gets me every time too. When it comes to Harrisonburg and Harrisburg, that happens. But so example one, our office is dedicated to helping refugees acclimate to their new community. In my role, I help them find housing, secure jobs, take English classes, so et cetera, et cetera. And I think, the second one, when it comes to CWS, is the same thing, especially if you're speaking on an advocacy point of view. This is how you talk about why a piece of legislation matters to you on the local level. And so, really, what this is about is like, it's one thing to say your mission, it's one thing to say about what your organization does. It's another thing to say, like, this is what I do to support that mission, because then people can connect with that as opposed to like a elevator speech or something different. So don't be afraid to talk about the actual work you do, because it personalizes it and humanizes it. We can go to the next one. So mindful messaging, and countering misinformation. Here's some stuff, and we're going to share all this stuff, so I don't want to read through it step by step. But most people in America support asylum as soon as they hear about what people are seeking asylum for. And I think there are plenty of reasons that people, as soon as they're like, oh, well, of course they want to come here. Not like they're taking advantage of us, but we should help them. And whether that is fleeing gang violence or domestic violence or what have you, it's as soon as Americans hear what people are fleeing from, that's when we make the connection. And we don't want to focus on, the horror stories that we hear from our clients, um, because that is not a way that American communities can connect to their story. We want to focus on families. We want to focus on how they're lifting up our communities. And I think that if you talk about a new American trying to figure out how to get better groceries for their children, well, most Americans probably feel that way too. And I think that bridge, instead of building the wall of trauma, is one of the key things. But I will also say that don't assume full understanding. I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker. And I've told this story many times, but CWS had a case with a federal judge back in 2019, and the judge, who had probably 18 more degrees than I had, didn't know the difference. And he kept conflating asylum seeker with refugee. So in your messaging, I would say don't be afraid to go like to the ABCs and explain about who you're serving, whether it be an asylum seeker or a refugee. We can go next slide. Madison.
Thanks so much, Chris. So this is part of the topics covered in this media training that Chris and I both really enjoy discussing. And that's because I feel like it's a little bit more optimistic than other elements of what we discuss here. So I'm going to get a little bit more into detail about something that Chris mentioned on the last slide, which is the fact that Americans do overwhelmingly still support welcoming newcomers and specifically welcoming asylum seekers and refugees. We have recent polling data from the Immigration Hub that shows that Americans are highly receptive to a message of safety, security, and stability for all, even when compared against a message about of Americans first. And you wouldn't think this to listen to national rhetoric, but it is true according to quite a bit of polling data. The issue is that Republicans and conservative voices on immigration dominate the news cycle. And in this same polling data, we found that 70% of Americans said that they had recently heard messaging from a Republican, on an anti-immigration stance, and only 30% had heard from a progressive or Democratic voice on the same topic. So the issue here is not that Americans are necessarily intrinsically opposed to welcoming immigrants, but instead that we're being flooded with messaging about why we should be afraid of migrants. 65% of independents and 50% of Republicans understand that immigration messaging is being used to fearmonger and create kind of like a scare tactic approach to the conversation at a national level, which is an astonishing statistic to me. It is absolutely wild to me that 50% of our nation's conservatives understand that they are being manipulated through fear on this topic. Therefore, it's important that we are very strategic and also effective with our messaging. It's important to highlight families and communities of migrants. That's significantly more likely to garner sympathy. Americans are opposed to separating families, and Americans are opposed to breaking up folks who have lived as a family unit in the United States for a long time. Some talking points that we have found to be effective and are based off of this polling data are listed here and can include the fact that asylum seekers are fleeing danger, not causing or bringing it to the United States, that migrants are statistically less likely to commit crimes than native-born Americans. This is another kind of astonishing data point because the reverse is used so often to fearmonger on the national stage, but is just simply not true. That the US has always welcomed refugees and asylum seekers, and that our communities have been stronger because of it, and that migrant communities perform some of our toughest labor and support economic growth wherever they go. We find that it's really, really effective to reiterate the point that we need to ensure that families are not separated, that they can stay together, and also emphasizing the fact that separating families has been used as a political tactic and a way of deterring immigration to the United States, which is absolutely inhumane. And again, a lot of Americans from just a values-oriented stance are going to oppose. And we can go to the next slide. So it's important that when you're kind of in this situation where you're either participating in storytelling, you're talking to someone who maybe is a member of your audience or maybe isn't, that you have some sort of call to action. It's one thing to get someone to a place of being sympathetic to your messaging, and it's another one to get them to a place of being willing to act on behalf of migrant justice. So some things to kind of think through as you're establishing your key messaging are what your specific call to action might be. So if you're talking to supporters or an audience that you know is friendly to migrant justice, what can your supporters do specifically to counter bad rhetoric? This could be, preparing people to have conversations with family members, friends, or faith communities that are opposed to immigration, or that fundamentally misunderstand aspects of it. It could also be, employing social media graphics, polls, that sort of thing, things that help people engage on these topics and sort of increase the messaging that we are looking for, that pro-migrant, pro-humanitarian response messaging. asking what supporters can do to help families, refugees, and new neighbors in the community broadly. You know, there's a whole myriad of options here now, thanks to options like private sponsorship, as well as the ever increasing need for newly resettled folks to receive like cash assistance and material assistance once they have been resettled. There's pretty much always opportunities for someone to get involved in person if that's the type of person that they are, and there's always opportunities to give strategically to help migrants. For those of us who are more interested in the advocacy side or are more interested in legislative affairs, considering advocacy related asks is a very, very effective strategy. So calling local representatives, getting on a petition, supporting local legislation or a federal bill, ensuring that your voice or the person you're talking to's voice is being heard on the national stage. I mean, obviously, we're always going to need a lot of folks who have a lot of energy for that sort of thing, because it's difficult and time consuming, but at the end of the day, incredibly effective. And then finally, considering including further education materials. So providing, in an advocacy setting, we call these leave behinds, but leaving folks with more information if they're interested in it, to get familiar with the issues at hand, to further, counter the bad rhetoric that they hear and that they encounter, and to also potentially rectify their own misunderstandings about what is fundamentally a very complicated field. Next slide. So we've included here just a couple of pointers. These are sort of just ways that you might think through how to bridge your way out of a bad faith argument. The idea here is that if you're talking to someone who is not fundamentally sympathetic to the point that you're making, is how you can, in the moment, sort of use rhetorical tools to kind of pivot the conversation and get the person to a more empathic stance. So some examples are just, again, these are just kind of for you to like take and think about, like you would use whatever felt natural to you in the moment. We all do this in our day-to-day lives. But honoring that person's perspective, a lot of folks are not coming to you out, with the intention of creating a fight, starting a fight, or like spewing misinformation. They're coming to you with what they believe to be a accurate understanding of the status quo. So honoring that perspective and saying, it's so interesting that you brought that up. That's a really interesting perspective. It actually reminds me of something I read last week, or something I saw at work, and kind of not negating the fact that they believe what they believe, but instead using that to springboard into further information that you have about the topic. Before we get off that topic, let me add, this is something that I feel like I do a lot in situations where the conversation isn't a fight necessarily, but that it's more two people trying to share their perspective in a way. So it's saying, okay, so you've talked about this topic, you've talked about why you think the border needs to be more secure. Can I tell you a little bit about, folks, what I've heard from folks who work in border shelters? Kind of just keeping that conversation flowing. Helping to put facts or data in perspective. If, often folks may cling to a single data point that looks alarming out of context and isn't when it's contextualized. Helping, redirect the conversation by saying it's true that, X, Y, or Z, you may have read X, Y, or Z in the news, but it's important to remember the broader context of what's happening, for example, at the border. And then directly just kind of disagreeing politely with someone, saying it's so interesting you bring that up. That's actually, not the case. It all depends on how that conversation is working, what your goal is in the conversation. But these are just some rhetorical tools that we wanted to provide you with, and ones that I use, fortunately or unfortunately, every day. Next slide.
And I would also just add that just because like you not answering a question directly because it's a bad faith question does not mean that you're engaging in a bad faith way in a conversation with someone. Sometimes there are certain preconceptions, and we don't have to play to that. We can directly just pivot out of it. We don't owe bad faith arguments any credence when we're trying to talk to people about our issues.
So now we're going to get a little bit into storytelling and sharing as, sort of a strategic outlook on how to further, migrant narratives in media. So these are a couple of concepts that we employ. This is, definitely not specific to CWS. These are sort of the ideas that are being employed more broadly as organizations engage in storytelling for impact around migrant narratives. So these are just a couple of things to keep in mind when, employing employing storytelling and trying to evoke, some sort of change through storytelling. First and foremost, first person narratives humanize and give agency to our most vulnerable members of society. This is always going to be the case, that someone being able to talk directly to their lived experiences is going to resonate with a broader audience, simply because, humans are very like a human narrative about a lived experience is a very powerful thing. Hearing someone's perspective on forced migration is going to really resonate with folks who haven't had that experience and who could be made to feel empathic about that experience. It's important that we carefully select the stories that we tell. This is something that the communications team at CWS has a lot of conversations about, is how we avoid exploitation of traumatic events and of the sort of intrinsic trauma of forced displacement, while also understanding that a majority of voters are going to support providing protection for victims of war, for families, especially families that have undergone or are facing forced separation, and victims of violence. It's important that we, understand that these are resonant topics, while also understanding that it's important to emphasize the good and to share, the positive aspects of our clients' experiences. It's always productive to emphasize common ground. This is something, again, personally, outside of my professional life, I employ pretty much constantly when trying to shift someone's perspective, is ensuring that first I have some common ground with them where we can sort of establish shared values and move from there. So as Chris already mentioned, folks are going to be, even if they're not necessarily sympathetic to migrant issues, are going to be sympathetic to the idea of parents needing to feed their kids, of kids wanting to go to school, of celebrating holidays and learning new skills, looking for jobs. These are all topics that most people have experienced and are going to understand, even if that experience is being felt by someone who does not have a shared background with them. Reiterating what I said earlier, that we need to focus on the positive whenever possible and avoid exploitation of trauma. It's important that at the end of the day, we understand that, the migrant stories are very, very powerful, and also can often result in re-traumatization of the person sharing the story. It's something that it's very important from a communications perspective to stay conscientious of. And finally, this is something that it, sort of depends on what the specific story might be, but considering highlighting volunteers and community members as well as clients. I think, especially in this election cycle, one really, heartwarming thing to come out of a lot of negative rhetoric around migrants is local communities banding together to say, no, our migrants belong here, they live here, they're our neighbors, and they've become new Americans and have started their lives in our communities. You can't harass them, they're our neighbors. So I think it is important whenever possible, especially, kind of in this context of really highly, evocative imagery, to emphasize the fact that new and old Americans alike welcome migrants and want them in our communities. And next slide. Okay, so one final thing before I hand it back over to Chris, just to say that when it comes to sharing client stories, we are definitely aware of, the fact that the client might feel some sort of power imbalance if you come to them and ask for them to participate in storytelling. We never ever want our clients to feel uncomfortable sharing their stories or to feel like they were pressured to do so. If it's going to lead to, any further traumatization or, evoking imagery that the client is not comfortable with, we absolutely will not pursue that sort of storytelling. We can always anonymize clients' stories. It's very easy to change names and to remove personal identifiers. We do that all the time. It's important that clients know that that is an option. And it is always important to emphasize that their services received will not be impacted in any way by their decision to or to not engage in storytelling. It's very important if you do have, an idea for storytelling or a project that you might be excited to try, that you talk through that potential product with a manager or a member of your communication staff to ensure that the details included can't be misconstrued or weaponized against, the client or the organization. Unfortunately, we do deal with pretty hostile media outlets who are looking for any reason to demonize us, our work, and our clients. So it's just, better safe than sorry. Next slide. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to like echo what Madison underlined is that there is no press hit, there is no fundraising goal that is more important than the safety of our clients or their families that they are separated from. That is something that we pride ourselves on, but we all know in tough times when we want to raise a story, we have the urge to want to get something out there, but it's never more important than the client's safety, especially when we're providing them services. So I'll just add here a few ways that CWS can aid and help you out with resources. And it doesn't have to be just about bad rhetoric with community members or reporters or from candidates. Um, we can help out with talking points and issue one pagers, whether it breaking it down, some of the things we've talked about already. We can also suggest ideas for social media content. We can offer ideas or templates for press statements or available for interviews. And similarly with op-eds and thought leadership pieces, blogs, anything that you think that could impact your community to be more supportive of your work or more welcoming. We're always open to just hopping on the phone really quick and having a chat about how we can uplift that or how it should be focused. Same thing with quote creation. Sometimes a reporter might reach out to you and just basically want, hey, in response to this news that just broke, do you have anything you want to say? And that doesn't mean you have to hop on the phone with them. You can just send them 3 sentences about how you feel about it. And we're happy to talk about that too. I already mentioned the one pagers, and also, a lot of us are very educated on our issues, but it doesn't mean that we feel confident to go into an interview with a reporter. And we have some resources that we'll share with you after the fact that can help you prepare for that if that does come up. Next slide, please. And I know that a number of us on our call, we are 501c3, so we cannot endorse any candidate running for office this November, and that's explicitly or implicitly. But we can discuss issues. And so back to like the previous slides, prepare your message, focus on strengths, and don't wade into the political arena. Just say, talk about American values, talk about families, talk about human rights. That's all fine. And again, much like Madison was talking about, it's better to build bridges instead of walls. And we stress our people's stories and our clients' stories as opposed to sharing trauma and sharing violence. That's very key for us, and it really does sway voters in this sense. Next slide. And I think we can go ahead and hand this over to Dawn to talk about security around the election, because I know this is a big concern for many of our offices and probably a lot of your people. That specifically around the rhetoric around Haitian immigrants and various things, but I'll let you go, Don.
Okay, it says I can't turn my video on though, so you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
You should be able to now, Dawn.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hey, everyone. My name is Dawn Higgins. I'm the Director for Security for Church World Service. My guess is that some of you attended a previous presentation that I did a while back, maybe a year or so ago. I lose track of time. Things have flown by. I had this question put forth because I just think I wanted to get a general idea of anybody thinking, how many people have been thinking about the security aspect of things. So whenever you want to close the poll and go to the next slide, we'll talk more about that. But I think that brings me to exactly where I want to be, which is there are a lot of things that we need to think about moving into the election. And I always preface this with, do we know any of these are going to happen? We do not know, of course. Yesterday, I got a travel warning to about 7 or 8 cities because there were going to be demonstrations there. Are they going to be civil, nice demonstrations where people are just trying to make a point and everyone's walking around saying something of the same uh, thing instead of, or is it going to be something that becomes more escalated? And then, and keeping in mind that sometimes this escalation does not come from the original people who were planning the demonstration or the call to action. It is from the outsiders who want to agitate and cause trouble. So I think when and I know that not everybody is in an office and that some people are working hybrid, but some of these, if not all of these things, are applicable throughout whatever you do and wherever you actually sit yourself down to do your work or go out to do your work. So we'll talk a little bit about those suspicious packages, threatening and harassing calls, social media issues, who's in charge if something happens, and then physical site security. So there's just a lot of things I want you to think about. There's not going to be one big answer here to anything. We will send some stuff out after this webinar today, but you're always welcome to get a hold of me. I'm happy to share with you anything I have. I always say the usual joke. I didn't trademark any of it. It's not like I'm getting any money out of anything. I want everybody to be able to be ready to move forward if something like should happen. But the other thing is, and I say this in almost every one of my presentations when it has to do with security, is some plan is better than no plan. And so, the things that you might think about if you do work in an office could very well be applicable if you are going to the grocery store or if you're picking your kid up from school or whatever the case may be, if you're at the gym, whatever the case may be. So if we'll go to the next slide. So when we talk about civil unrest, one of the things is, thinking about what happens if something happens outside where I'm working, or even in my home for that matter, which would be odd, but nonetheless, if you're in an apartment complex, it's abuts a building where something's happening in front of it. What do you do? I mean, do you know where you would shelter in place? Where's the safest place for you to go? And what do you have supplies in there? In your home or in a safe room in a building or in your office rather, should something happen, should you get stuck there. And that's not just for civil unrest, that's for like right now where they're looking at hurricanes in Florida. Hopefully people down there, because they're getting hit with hurricanes quite consistently, are thinking about those things, right? Or, do I have a food ahead of time, non-perishables, things like that. So and these are just things to think about. What if you get separated or you have to exit your building? Where will you guys all meet up? And who's in charge of keeping track of who's in the office that day or who's not in the office? Or somebody left to go to a meeting and didn't bother to tell someone else, and then we're looking around for that person. So a lot of it just has to really do with communications, thinking ahead about things, knowing where your exits are, knowing where you would meet up with one another should something happen, and knowing where you would shelter in place, away from windows, away from the line of something coming through the building. So those types of things. Next slide. One of the big things is you're going to want to avoid interaction. I mean, this all kind of actually dovetails exactly into what Madison and Chris were talking about is, at that point in particular, there's not going to be any logic, right? I mean, a person yelling in someone else's face is not going to get anything accomplished. So it's best to just put your blinders on, go straight ahead to look for someplace safe to be, right? Even if it's not an agitated type of situation, just be quiet, move on. Be prepared to shelter in place if you have to, lock your door, close the blinds, make sure you're out of the way of the windows. And of course, it's always, speaking of news, it's always important, I feel like, to monitor local news. Additionally, I always hype these people, even though, I mean, it's not like they pay me, but this is a group of news it's called Factual, and they verify news before they push it out. And I get that. It's FACTAL. And you can follow, I'm not a big fan of Twitter either, but one of the reasons I do have Twitter is I follow, or X now as it's called, is I follow Factual, because I know if something pushes that information across, if they push it across, it's been verified. It's not from some fly-by-night news organization or underground media or whatever. It's verified. Case in point, we had an active shooter in Indianapolis, which is where I'm based in the Midwest. And there was an active shooter situation there, and everybody's blowing up Facebook. My neighbors texted me, and boom, right there, Factual immediately confirmed that that's what in fact was happening. So that's a good one. But I mean, local news, following what's going on, learning things like, are they shutting down? Are they shutting down public transportation like they did during the January 6th situation, like they did during the demonstrations during the Black Lives Matter protests and stuff. So I mean, that could affect how you get things done, could affect your schools being closed. It could be, so I just think it's important to stay tuned and know who's going to make decisions in your office, who's in charge if the office director's not there, who's making sure information gets shared to one another so that you guys can be prepared to, and this isn't just for civil unrest, it's for all sorts of things, making sure that you know who's doing what. So next slide, please. So now we're going to sashay, if you will, into suspicious items. And again, I can get you these flyers if you want some for where you work, or if you want to just see them up close and personal. But I think it goes without saying some of these things. But if you don't think about it, like honestly, I would have never thought about the stamp thing until I started re-reviewing some stuff for myself. Because if the people are not wanting to go to the post office, they're putting like 25 stamps on something instead of getting it metered and weighed and all that, that could be an indicator. And again, not one of these things is standalone. You got to look at the whole big picture. So, just look for like something that does, like says to, for example, in my case, to director for security in some ratty looking box with no return label on it, and care of Church World Service or whatever. That's going to be weird, right? Unless I see it's like an actual, document, which we get solicitations all the time for people wanting to sell us security systems and stuff like that. But, if it's like something that's really weird. So, keep an eye on those types of things. Pay attention to what it looks like. Don't approach it. Don't try to spell it. Don't try to move it. Isolate it. Get people out of the area. That's for suspicious items. If it's something that you think is could be potentially explosive, and since we've changed these slides around, that could be on the next slide. It could maybe not be, I'm not sure. But again, just stay away from those things, back out of the area, create what we call in police work, an inner perimeter, stay away around it, stay away from being around it. So, and then call the authorities, make sure everybody knows, again, what to do or not to do, where to go, not to go, etc. And I think that's another thing I did forget in my introduction. I retired from the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. So that's my background. So you'll hear policing references quite frequently from me. Next slide, please. This is another one. We haven't got a lot of them. I feel like we've been pretty blessed, knock on wood, as the old saying goes, here at Church World Service. We do have these things come in on occasion, but they're really kind of one-offs, where we get into those situations where it becomes repetitive or threatening. Those are different. But the basic thing is you just need to keep calm. I know the initial thing would be to hang up, but if you're looking at somebody who's threatening or saying there's a bomb somewhere or something like that, you'll want to keep them talking. You want to get more information. You want to know, you want to note in your head or write down, how they're talking. Do they have a cadence? Do they have an accent? Are they stuttering? Are they saying certain words or phrases that might be only applicable to certain parts of the country? It's a crazy thing because that's I listened to a podcast that says my brother-in-law, and he was talking about that one time that a crime was actually solved because of the way an individual phrased something, because it was really only from that part of the country that people ever said that. It's kind of like the old thing about submarine sandwiches, they're heroes, they're subs, there's another hoagies, there's all sorts of different names for them. But you know, in Indiana, if you want to go get something to drink, most of the time people are going to go, I'm going to go get a Coke. Nobody's 3/4 of the people aren't getting Cokes. They're going to go get a drink. So, you know, it's just weird stuff like that. So watching for those types of things, making note of it. If for some reason there's an incoming number, make sure you write that down, of course. Be polite, show interest. You know, I've been reading a book called Never Split the Difference. And one of the things, it's just a simple thing, is just reflecting or mirroring. Like, so you're telling me, so what would you say? You said that this is going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And then they repeat. And, you know, and the thing is, it's just like a de-escalation, which I was kind of chuckling when Chris and Madison were talking about, you know, how to engage with people and not to argue and things like that. I'm like, we could have also just abutted some of these conversations with a de-escalation training, because really it's basic stuff, right? It's being kind, it's leading with kindness, being polite, showing interest, being reflective, and giving someone a time and space to present the information they want you to hear. So same type of thing on harassing calls or threatening calls. So next slide, please. And then these are things I'm not, you're not going to hear me tell you to do something. That's not my role. My role is to say, give you some tools and some information so you can make some more educated or informed decisions about what you might want to do. Signage, for example, you know, how well known are you in the community? How much signage do you have out? How much social media presence do you have? Like, right now, you may want to taper that down. You may want to be really selective about what you put forth on social media, or what type of interviews or information you give to the media. You know, all of these types of things are just considerations, because it's hard to know. Actually, I have a colleague who's our consultant for security, and we were talking the other day. We went through a look through our website, and it's just simple. There's so much stuff and much information on there. So those are things to think about. You want to have a photograph forward out on a public media site. I don't know. It's just things to consider, especially if, you know, you have to consider the context. You know, where are you actually physically? Where are you physically in the country? Where's your office physically located? What's the local context? More so than the national context, because you're sitting right in the middle of that local context. So I always liken the thing to, you know, we're a welcoming community. Well, that's the city saying that, right? I mean, that doesn't mean everybody in the community is welcoming. You may be in a neighborhood or a pocketed area that it's not quite so welcoming. So things to think about. And if you're co-located, collaboration and communication is key. You know, making sure you all are keeping each other aware of what's going on. If you've had any threats, if you've seen anything odd occurring or anybody odd hanging around, or you've gotten some odd calls or things like that. So again, just things to think about as you move forward into this election season. Next slide. So these are a lot of my resources. Again, all this is open source material. I'm happy always to share anything that I have with you. I do a lot of research. A lot of things are based on my background and things such as that. But I know that we're hitting a broad types of topics here, and I will also tell you that if before someone asks, yes, we are very clear on what's going on in Ohio. It's our understanding that one of the political candidates will be maybe visiting there soon. So again, we have seen some issues related to that, and we've had to take some actions related to that. And you know, you never know. Fortunately, it's been shall we say, violent so far, to my knowledge. No one has said anything specific about that to me or reported it to me, but there have been some things that have occurred, and, you know, we have to look for that, and we'll see. And that's why, you know, just to throw another thing out while I'm thinking about it, is if you're going to have an event in the next few weeks, you may have a fundraiser that you have on the second weekend of October every year, no matter what. Then let's talk about that too, because let's make sure you're planning around the event as well, to do some sort of a context assessment and a risk assessment to make sure that you feel confident. And it may be something as simple as you hire an off-duty security guard officer, something like that. So anyway, with that having all been said, I will throw it out to, we're right about on where we wanted to be. So I'll throw it back to Joy, and we can answer questions if there are any.
Yes, so we're gonna jump to our Q&A time. However, before we go there, I would like to just take 1 minute of your time. If you can just scan this QR code, we would love to hear your feedback about today's webinar, also your suggestions for future topics for our webinars. So please just take 1 minute to scan this QR code and give us your feedback. That would be very helpful. And then we're gonna go to our Q&A session. And just a reminder, this is a social learning space. It's meant to be an opportunity for you to share your resources as well, lessons learned in the field, some good practices, things that didn't go very well. I think it's going to be very helpful for the rest of the group to hear about it, to learn from it. So if you have also other resources that maybe your organization has, that would be very helpful to share. So yeah, so gonna wait for your feedback, and then we're gonna transition to the Q&A time. Also, this is a link for the feedback, so if you don't want to have, the QR code, you can just follow the link.
And I should add that if you don't have, if you're just still thinking about what questions that you'd like to ask, we put our media inbox, that's for Mass and myself, into the chat. And I know Dawn had her email in the presentation. Maybe you can put that in there too, Dawn. But I think this isn't like, at the end of the hour, we don't provide any more information. Feel free to reach out to us. That's the most important thing. And we will, like I said in the chat, we'll be sending out a number of resources, all of which Don listed out on one of their slides, and also a number of other just civic engagement stuff that Mass and I can provide to you.
Thank you, Chris, and we can move to the Q&A time. So feel free to come off mute, raise your hand, drop it in the chat, whichever is most comfortable for you. Please feel free to share what you have in mind.
Since we have some blank time, I'll just throw this in too. As far as personal safety goes, because we kind of talked more broadly about things that might be office related or election related, but the same thing holds true there. It's like, the see something, say something. It's still applicable, and I can't emphasize enough, if it doesn't seem right and your gut tells you it's not right, it's probably not right. But take some action on that. Be aware of what's going on around you all at all times. Make sure people know where you are, share your location if you're comfortable with that, those types of things. Lots of different things can happen, and it doesn't even have to be related to this situation or this topic. It's just a busy time of the year and in the world in general. So paying attention to what's going on around you is always important. And really, that's as simple as that's what situational awareness is, just paying attention to what's going on around you, and then acting or reacting to what you see and know is occurring. So.
And I also want to say one of the most amusing things of Don and I's relationship at CWS is that I want to promote things, and Don wants to make sure everyone's safe, and it's all the benefit for everyone. So it's not like an either or thing. We can figure out ways to uplift the events you're having and the things you're doing while also keeping you very much safe and your clients safe. But it's a fun back and forth for us sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, that event planning is another thing. Like I said, it pops up, and we don't do as much as we should, probably communication wise within the organization, to really share that type of information, that we need to be thinking of those things as we do events, or we have open houses, things like that. And the other thing too, everyone, if you want to, you could have the local police come in and at least do a walkthrough at your office, if you have an actual physical office space. I won't say that every time you'll get somebody to say that they'll do it, but generally speaking, my understanding is most departments will do that. If nothing else, invite them in for a cup of coffee. Who's the beat officer, and let them know who's works during the day shift by our beat, or by where our beat is, or where our office is, what beat it is. That way you got some personal relationships starting. And I think that that's really critically important. And if you have any questions about that, I'll be glad to tell you. I can throw out the old police and donuts joke and, off we go. But definitely it's worth a shot. I mean, and I always like to do that when I was on the department, but I also like people. So
I see a question in the Q&A chat. How can you get ahead of commonly asked questions, information sessions, and social media posts?
that's Chris, I think, or Madison.
Yeah, I mean, can you repeat that real quick?
Yes. How can you get ahead of commonly asked questions, information sessions, and social media posts?
You mean
That's the
ahead
question.
of
Yeah.
do something
Yes.
proactive? Well, I think that's a lot of that is going to be sent to you after this call. We have a number of talking points. We have a number of social media posts, and I think these are all things that you don't always know when something is going to come. But we have the tools so you can respond to it to kind of diffuse the situation as soon as it does pop up. How do you get away from it or ahead of it? I think just really doing the good work. I mean, I know that's kind of derivative, but it's people on social media are going to say wild stuff. Right wing radio hosts and pundits will come up with anything they want, and we're often surprised that they went to a certain place that we didn't think of. But the simple fact is, when we come back to our core roots and the resources that we share with you, that it diffuses it really quickly.
Are there any more questions? Anyone wants to come off mute or drop it in the chat?
I mean, I would just add that I wish we could predict the craziness that people are going to say about the work we're doing, which is just the decent thing to do. So I really wish we could get ahead of it all, but sometimes it comes out of so far out of left field, like we saw with Haitian immigrants and eating pets. There's no way we could have gotten ahead of that. We didn't know that was going to be a talking point, but there you go.
Isn't that joke? You didn't have it on your bingo card for the election. You know, yeah, again, I mean, if you would have told me that was gonna come up, I would have been, that's so outrageous, even I can't imagine that happening. But, and that's after being a cop for 34 years and seeing some crazy stuff that was way up there. So anyway, I won't take any more of your time, but yeah, it's hard to predict because people often ask stuff about active assailants and stuff as well. And that's the same kind of circumstance. I mean, I feel very confident that our law enforcement throughout the country is monitoring these groups, but it's the individuals that can be really problematic. And so that's why, I really do say, if you see something, say something. Every single active assailant in this country has had pre-incident indicators, every single one of them. Now, whether somebody said something about them or not is another issue. Sometimes there's a fear especially if they're related to a person, but there are other avenues. So and with mental health being a major issue and the lack of help available, there's just a lot of things that we have to take into play. But so again, something weird, it's probably not right. So let's just talk about it and figure it out. So, but I always thank all you all for your time and your work. So, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think, seeing something and saying something also, like if you're just hearing like rumors in your community that there's going to be like a PR crisis or a bad story about to come out, let us know. And it doesn't have to be involved with law enforcement. It can just be communications and press oriented too. So just hit us up. There's no 5 minutes that we can't spend with you just to hash it out and think about possible outcomes. But I'll stop there.
Well, I think these are all the questions that we have today. So I want to thank again our presenters today, and thank you everyone for attending today's RWC monthly webinar. And again, you will receive an email, a follow-up email from me with the links and the resources that you can access. And on behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you, and we hope that you enjoyed the rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.